Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I want to do this video, but before I do, yes, this video is on Dave the Film Junkie, but it's because he represents a certain sect of people, and I want to do a video on it. But before I do that, I want to read from Psalms 34, verses 17 and 18. The righteous cry, and the Lord hears them and delivers them out of all their troubles. The Lord is near to they that are of a broken heart, and save such as be of a contrite spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers them out of them all. Just want to leave you with that. It's not that you don't get afflictions in life if you try to walk the right path of love. It's that you get delivered from them, all of them, by the Lord eventually. Okay. So Dave, the Film Junkie, is going off on this rant about how WB has tried to, and Joss Whedon tried to rip this film from Zack Snyder and make a film that's not a Zack Snyder film. And you're going to hear this from certain DCEU fans. I was worried that that would happen in this film. And that did not happen in this film. That did not happen in this film. Now, for Mr. Dave the Film Junkie, go and watch an interview where Ezra Miller says that it's funny that Zack Snyder, when he was directing the film, made it more Joss Whedon-y than even Joss Whedon. When Joss Whedon came on board, he actually toned it down. And so, Zack and Joss, I don't think people get what's happening with WB. And all these people who are moaning and crowing that Zack got ripped off. Zack's recommending the film to little kids, and he's sponsoring these kids to go see this movie. Why would Zack do that if he was being shafted? No. Zack's vision was crystallized on the screen by Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon served Zack in what he was doing. Yes, Joss Whedon did some reshoots, but they were not the majority of this movie. In fact, I would say that close to 80% of this movie, if not 90% of this movie, is Zack Snyder. And Joss Whedon touches up in little spots in the movie. And then coming down to the end of the movie, you could tell that Joss Whedon had... He corrected some things coming down to the end of the movie. But you could see that Zack had that same idea. And one of the ways is just to follow the CGI. You guys talk about CGI so much. Okay, and you talk about the obvious CGI. Well, follow the obvious CGI in the movie. And when you see that it's not so obvious, but it's still going with the scene, then it should tell you Zack was heading that direction anyway. Okay? This is just common sense and critical thinking. Dave needs to calm the hell down. He needs to calm down, rethink what he's saying, and understand this was Zack's vision all along. Okay? Did Joss Whedon add some of his flavor in there? Obviously. But as Ben Affleck said, he sprinkled a little bit of his fairy dust. It wasn't a lot. It was just a little bit of his fairy dust on this movie. Joss Whedon has little sprinkles of dialogue that's redone. And when we say redone dialogue, we don't mean that it's not saying the same things that Zack was saying, but maybe the actors are acting it slightly differently. Maybe it's the same script, just said a little differently. And a good example of that is Cyborg when he takes command of the Tumbler or the Nightcrawler. Okay? It's done a little bit differently to what we saw in the trailers. Parts of this movie have been cut out because it's been cut out. It's just what it is. It's a movie. Okay? People are trying to make a stormload of fuss over nothing. Okay? Absolutely nothing. It's a nitpick. It's ridiculous. You know? You may have had certain expectations for a movie. That didn't happen. Okay? There's certain things in this movie that are slightly absurd to me as well. But it doesn't take from the movie at all. And I said it again, and I'm going to say it again. This movie has a serious tone. And it's depicted by the beginning of the movie. That song, Everybody Knows, had me in tears when I'm watching it, what's happening. And that's typical Zack Snyder. He always begins a movie with people hardly saying a word. There was actually the beginning of the movie started a certain way, but nonetheless, with people hardly saying a word. That's a typical Zack Snyder film. Typical. Did Joss Whedon have some input into that? Absolutely. In the beginning of the film, we saw it. We knew the obvious thing that was Joss Whedon there. We know what was Joss Whedon there. But don't get it twisted. This is a Zack Snyder film from beginning to end. And so this whole, WB was having this, trying to sabotage Zack Snyder, and it's bullshit. Okay? It's bullshit. Zack recommended Joss Whedon continue it because Joss Whedon is like that dream director Zack would love to have worked with to finish his project with. The reason Zack could step away and be so confident that when he stepped away from the movie, it would go his direction is because Zack was working with Joss Whedon. And then the dream musical director you could ever get on a movie, which was Danny Elfman, came onto the scene. And I can now say he is definitely a dream musical score director you would want your movie directed by, because Junkie XL used Danny Elfman's theme for Batman in BVS. It's Danny Elfman's theme. That's why Danny Elfman easily fit into the Justice League movie. And he added, like I said, that magic, that extra adventure magic dimension that was needed for the movie to keep it uplifted, so that it still felt hopeful throughout, even though there was peril and danger in it. And you could feel it in the music. It didn't have to be earth-shattering, and it didn't have to be earth-unique. It just needed to depict the tension in the movie. Now, I've heard some people say, Steppenwolf was a CGI corrector and there was no tension. Oh, you know there was tension. You guys know it was tension. Okay? I've watched this movie twice. There was tension. You can't say that for Thor Ragnarok. Okay, Thor Ragnarok had zero tension. Okay? I've watched the Avengers movie. I had zero tension. Okay? And please don't compare this movie to the Avengers. The Avengers is so much more inferior to this movie. CGI has come a long way since the Avengers. And the storytelling has come a long way since the Avengers. This is not on the level of Avengers. Avengers is not on this level. But what I would say is, the impact that the Avengers had on the world, where people were blown away and it was universally received, this movie has not received that. Notice, I'm a guy that talks specifics, and I talk when you check it, and when you fact check it, and when you fact check what I'm saying, you realize, but there's no way Avengers CGI could even touch the CGI in this movie. Okay? Besides that, who was the villain in Avengers? Anybody remember? Nobody remembers the villain. I don't remember the villain. I remember in Age of Ultron, Ultron was the villain. I can't remember any fight scenes. I can't remember anything that was memorable about him. But I guarantee you guys will remember Steppenwolf. As much as y'all say he's a weak villain, you guys going to remember him. I can't even remember the villain from Doctor Strange. Who was the villain in Doctor Strange? I can't even remember who that was. My point being, those are not memorable villains. But I can tell you the villain of Man of Steel was Zod. I can tell you the villain of Batman v Superman was Lex Luthor. Right? I can tell you the villain of Wonder Woman was Ares. Please, tell me the villains. What was the villain of Incredible Hulk? You guys remember that? Who was the villain of that? I can tell you the villain of Captain America. He was Red Skull. I remember the villain for Captain America to this day. Winter Soldier. I remember it was the Winter Soldier. It was the villain. Tell me, who was the villain for Captain America, the Civil War? Who was the villain? You guys remember his name? Can you remember his name? Do you remember the guy's name? I even remember Enchantress for Suicide Squad. Maybe it's because I'm into DC films. Maybe that's it. You know what I'm saying? But I don't remember the villains for most Marvel films. Ant-Man. Who was the villain for Ant-Man? You guys remember? Just being real here. We're being real here. So, I hear people talk about weak villains Maybe it's because I'm not into Marvel films. But please, please, all right? And to hear some of these DCEU fans bitch and moan, and then they try to come back with, oh, but I did enjoy the movie. Well, if you enjoyed the movie, shut your mouth. Shut your mouth. Because when people started to educate you on what the movie was actually doing, just like Man of Steel, I love Man of Steel. I hear so many hypocrites now talking about, oh, I loved Man of Steel. You loved it after you viewed it a number of times, but you were one of those people bashing it. Now I hear them saying, I love BVS The Ultimate Cut. I'm hearing them saying that now. But what I notice is a lot of more people are coming out the woodworks of notable channels and defending Zack Snyder's Justice League. And even talking about how the critics seem to be reviewing movies in a different way to how they used to review movies. That I find very interesting. And if that is the case, then I hope that a lot of people go see this movie so it could blow past $1 billion and do what it's supposed to do. And we can continue watching these movies in the DCEU. I will continue definitely watching the rest of the DCEU movies. And I want to thank Zack Snyder for what he did with this movie. And if I ever get a chance to meet him or talk or interview him, I would love to do so. Okay, Zack Snyder is one of those directors who's had a hard time by the public and by critics. This guy got hate at Comic-Con. Somebody started to boo him at Comic-Con. And all because he's just sharing such beautiful gems with the world. And I'm not just talking about comic book movies that you go and you're entertained and you leave. No, he's always had value. He changed my life and he's changed a lot of lives of people. And to know that this guy, his daughter died, and the critics don't have a heart. They go in and they try to trash this movie, which is a good movie and it has proper structure for filmmaking. And they go ahead and trash this movie, where they gave Thor Ragnarok a huge pass for what I consider a very garbage-like movie compared to Suicide Squad, compared to Suicide Squad, and compared to, well, okay, Suicide Squad, and that's, oh yeah, compared to Suicide Squad, yeah, even though I think it had better structure than Suicide Squad, but Suicide Squad was a hell of a lot more innovative. But anyway, a trashy movie that's not on Justice League's level, it's not on BVS's level, it's not on a Man of Steel level, it's not on a Wonder Woman level, probably Suicide Squad level. To praise shit and then to castigate something with value. And for all those DCEU fans who went in there expecting one thing, and because they didn't get it, they're bitching and moaning like little crybabies, when this movie has so much value to it. So much value to it. When I get into the spoiler, and I tell you, you guys going to have to wait till next week Sunday, because I want everybody and their mama to go watch this movie. I'm going to bring out the value of this movie. This movie covers a lot of very valuable things. And if you didn't cry in the beginning of this movie, then you don't have a soul. You're heartless. This movie set a very serious tone and built off of that. That's why I said this movie is not a comedy. Even though it had some comical moments in it, never once these characters were trying to be snide or they were trying to be funny. They weren't ever. And that's what I love about the DCEU movies. So anyway, on that note, I think Dave the Film Junkie should calm the hell down. Alright, and stop sounding like an idiot. Somebody needs to slap him. Because he's going overboard now. Okay? You're dissatisfied with certain things in the movie, fine. But don't now try and create this conspiracy theory which does not actually exist. WB did everything in their power to get Zack Snyder's vision on the screen. And quite frankly, I think they even gave Zack Snyder his wishes, made his dreams come true in some ways. And that's what really came up on the screen. They try to get the best possible people to streamline Zack's vision and get it out there. But obviously, we had so many people going in with so many thoughts in their mind that, like jackasses, they still missed his vision. And it's so sad because this is exactly where Zack was trying to go. That's why the date was there, November the 17th, 2001. It's because he's really paying tribute to Justice League, the animated cartoon series. And to see these idiots not get that and not understand that Zack was going for this, but he wanted to build a background, a backdrop to this in his other two movies, is to really need, these stupid DCU fans need to just get a slap. These are some DC fans that are really not being productive. They're being counterproductive to the fandom, and they're actually hurting these DC movies on the inside by speaking and spouting their nonsense, which I can easily debunk. That's the problem. This fool here is talking, and I'm debunking him easily, because Zack Snyder's vision was this movie. It was trimmed, it was edited, and Joss Whedon did some work, but he was doing it under a certain degree of information. He was informed in what he was doing. I even talked about the end part where the purple stuff was moving around, and now when I saw it in the movie, it was toned down. It was dialed back. Everything I've talked about for this movie, I saw on the screen. I'm just seriously amazed that the critics bashed this movie, to be honest with you. That's the thing that's surprising to me, because it's the stuff that they're saying. Because if you look at the content that they're saying, how the movie was loud, the movie wasn't loud. This is the first one of those Zack Snyder movies where there wasn't a whole bunch of explosions and it wasn't so loud. They talk about how the movie had no heart. That's ridiculous. You know, these are ridiculous claims, and it tells you the politics in Hollywood, how stupid it is. All right? And the sad part about it is, Zack actually proposed certain leftist ideals in this movie. He actually proposed what Hollywood is. Hollywood's mostly left-wing. He actually proposed certain left-wing ideals in this freaking movie, which I will talk in more detail to you guys about, because Zack always goes deep. And it's just weird how these stupid people from Hollywood and these stupid people who are critics missed the boat on that because they were so busy hating on Zack Snyder. The ideals that these stinking, stupid Hollywood preppy assholes usually advocate for, Zack Snyder advocated for in his movie. The irony. The irony. And Dave the Film Junkie, you call yourself a DCEU fan, and here you are bitching and moaning over things which are petty compared to what Zack Snyder's talking about in this movie. This movie came full circle. And yeah, some things are really kind of out there, but that's Zack Snyder. He always makes you uncomfortable. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's not just Whedon that some of these out there things are happening, but it's actually Zack Snyder that actually did that. I wouldn't be surprised. But then again, Joss Whedon may do something like that, or Zack Snyder may actually do something like that. So I'm going to go into this movie in more detail, and I'll explain to you the symbology, the metaphors of certain things, and even the politics of certain things that you saw in this movie, and how it's reflective of today's age and today's day. This movie is deep, all right? And it's nuanced. And it's not just a story being told like how you think. Zack Snyder doesn't do things like that. And no matter how you slice it, dice it, or cut it, even if you chop it up, you're going to see those things in there. And I'll go through them. I'll go through them all. Okay? I'll go through them all. This is a Zack Snyder movie. And you guys are going to understand, Zack Snyder is not just a visual director. Zack Snyder is not just one of those guys who is good at shooting action. No. 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 Zack Snyder has revolutionized the comic book industry. He has revolutionized it. He has revolutionized. He's the guy that makes people want to go buy comic books. Zack Snyder's the guy who gives you depth. And while this movie is not as deep as BVS, in no way, shape, or form, it does continue off of BVS. It is a standalone. You could watch it by itself. You don't have to see BVS to see it. But if you watch BVS, you would really appreciate the arc that Zack Snyder... And Zack Snyder loves Superman. That's not Joss Whedon that did that Superman. That's Zack Snyder who did that Superman. Okay? Get it straight. Okay? Joss Whedon edited and he pruned and sometimes he reshaped and he redirected certain things. Alright? But that's Zack Snyder's Superman. That is Zack Snyder's Superman. Joss Whedon was clear on what he wanted to do. I saw that Joss Whedon reworked certain things. I agree that Joss Whedon reworked certain things. Obviously the post-credit scenes. Joss Whedon edited the movie to fit in those scenes. Not all of the post-credit scenes and not all of the shots of the post-credit scenes are Joss Whedon. Once again, It seems as though this collaboration was well knit together, and Joss Whedon served Zack Snyder. And the reason he gets script credit is because Joss Whedon rerouted some of the dialogue or re-dramatized some of the dialogue. He didn't do a whole lot, but it's little minor things he changed, little nuances to make things more palatable, to make things more acceptable, to make things more streamlined. And this movie being 2 hours long is sufficient. It is sufficient as a movie. It is, I think, you don't need more time. But if you want to put more time, fine. But I think it's sufficient as a movie as it is. I said the same thing for Suicide Squad. When I saw Suicide Squad, I still like the theatrical cut over the extended cut, because I don't think you needed an extended cut for Suicide Squad. I do believe that the ultimate cut of Batman v Superman was superior to the theatrical cut. Clearly it was superior. But I don't think you need, for this movie as well, I don't think you need a extended or ultimate cut for this movie. It's good just as it is. I hope WB puts out this and doesn't, if you want to put out deleted scenes or whatever, that's fine. But this is good enough. This movie is epic. This movie is grand. This movie may not be the best comic book movie of all time, but it sure reflects the Justice League, especially the Justice League we saw in the animated series. The characters moved like them. The characters behaved like them. It was fantastic to see it come in live action in a realistically grounded sense of the word. So I absolutely love this movie. And the second time I saw it, I loved it even more. So this is where Zack Snyder wanted to carry the DCEU. And from this point onwards, this is where the DCEU builds off of. The foundation Zack Snyder placed down on the DCEU. And as I said before, critics are going to find themselves on the wrong side of history. It is sad for them because they did not appreciate the depth and the scope of a Zack Snyder film. And they never will. It's just because they have this bias and this hate towards a guy who's extremely creative and extremely pushing the boundaries and always adding value to things. And Zack Snyder has changed a lot of people's lives, including my own. And now I actually am willing to watch comic book movies because I know there's something extra, something more to be received in a comic book movie. This movie was epic. The stakes I found in this movie were really high. I thought the villain suited the movie very, very well. And it actually fell in line with what Steppenwolf actually is. And for those people who know Steppenwolf and how things go with Steppenwolf, this villain is actually probably the most powerful Steppenwolf I've seen. Okay? And this Steppenwolf fits in line with all the Steppenwolves from the cartoons to the comic books that we have seen of Steppenwolf. So I absolutely enjoyed this. And from a comic book perspective and from a comic animation perspective, dead on target. But I can't say much more. I don't want to spoil the movie. I think Dave the Film Junkie should calm the hell down. And I think other DCU fans should come on him and tell him, hey, Ninja, tone it down. Alright, we're in this thing together. This movie was about coming together. And DCEU and even Marvel fans, I think, are going to come together on this movie. Because I've seen some people who are dog-begone, diehard Marvel fans. And they enjoyed this movie. Kind of like what happened with Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman. This is continuing on with WB. I think the execs were on point with what they were doing because the execs were actually following the instruction of the the audience viewing, as well as they were getting a movie where you were never bored and it kept your attention. I think 2 hours was just perfect. If you went longer, I think some people would have been lost, and you would have even had even worse critical reviews, and you would have had even worse responses to this movie if it went any longer. So I actually believe that even though the nutritive value is sort of abridged, it's kind of cut short, it's better for people to be dying to see more than they're saying that it's long, it's boring, it's drab, this is a terrible movie, even though it may have nutritive value. So I think this movie was the right length. They did the right thing. I think they got the right formula. I just think the critics were so entrenched in the negativity of the DCEU, they never gave this movie a chance. and they planned to pan it when they saw it. That's exactly what they did. I guess when you come off of a movie that's a laugh fest where superheroes are not taken seriously, and you go into a movie where it's the tone of this movie was very solemn in the beginning. I was crying in the first set, the first set pieces of the movie. I was crying. And then this movie had stakes and mystery and drama, and a lot of people are being what is the word I'm looking for? They're in denial that this movie was a serious movie, and they're in denial that Steppenwolf was a damn good villain. They're in denial, okay? But if you've watched this movie, you know he was a good villain. He was solid as a villain. And all of the critiques that they're saying, and they go always back to the CGI, is unfounded. But again, you just have to go in there and see for yourself. You have to think for yourself. But a lot of you don't think for yourself. You understand what I'm saying? Y'all don't think for yourself. And this guy here, this dude here, he's just so stupid. He's just blurting out things. He cursed Joss Whedon when Joss Whedon liked something, saying Steppenwolf was a weak villain, which most people were agreeing that was a weak villain. He cursed out. I'm not saying that that's not a slap in the face to DCEU fans, and Joss Whedon will pay for that, okay? But what I'm saying, though, is he's just behaving on impulse. And people who behave on impulse, they behave like spoiled little children to throw a tantrum over things, and they're not getting all their facts together. They're just talking. They're not getting their facts together. They're not critically assessing anything. They're just talking out of their hindbrain because they're talking out of fear or out of emotion. And I don't think that stupid people like that should be allowed to have these huge platforms to spout their nonsense and to put poison into something that was good and something that was used to benefit people, uplift them, inspire them. The movie saying, in spite of this dark and sarcastic world we live in, we can be inspired. We can be better. We can be somebody else's hero. We have the choice to make that so. And this movie guides you through, after all that has happened in previous movies, guides you through how these different people of different backgrounds with different problems come together to make the world a better place. That's what this movie is about. Kind of like Thor Ragnarok as well, which has some of the similar themes, but in a much more comprehensive, relatable way to our world. Because all team-up movies will have things in common with themselves. Alright? So, that's where I'll leave you guys. You guys have a great one.